The year was 1875, and the vast American frontier was a land full of dangers, opportunities, and endless conflicts. The Apaches, a proud and powerful group of Native Americans, had long fought to protect their lands from the constant flow of settlers, soldiers, and explorers. The U.S. Army was determined to tame the wild lands, and the Apache tribes, refusing to give up their freedom, had become their greatest adversaries. The result was a harsh, bloody war that spread across the desert and mountains, leaving many on both sides feeling the bitter sting of loss. Among the settlers on the frontier was a cowboy named Jake McAllister. Tall, tough, and weathered from years of working cattle on the rough plains of Arizona, Jake had seen more than his fair share of danger. His reputation as a man who never backed down from a fight was well known. His hard, calloused hands and piercing blue eyes reflected a life lived in the harshest of conditions. But beneath his tough exterior, Jake had a sense of justice that often confused him, especially when it came to the Apache people. Raised with the idea that they were enemies of the settlers, Jake had always viewed them with suspicion and distrust. But he never wanted to see anyone suffer. One late afternoon, while out riding alone after a long day of cattle herding, Jake spotted something unusual from a distance. It was a figure moving through the desert, stumbling and dragging herself along the dusty earth. As he got closer, he realized it was a woman, and she was in bad shape. Her clothes were torn and blood stained her face and arms. She looked like she had been through a terrible ordeal. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he approached her. Was she one of the Apache, or perhaps a settler who had been caught in the middle of the fighting? His mind raced with thoughts of the worst possible outcome. As a cowboy, he knew how dangerous it could be to trust anyone, especially in a land where enemies often wore no clear uniform. But as he got closer, he saw the fear in her eyes, and something deep inside him made him pause. This woman was in desperate need of help. She couldn't have been an immediate threat if she was this badly hurt. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition as Jake drew closer. She gasped, trying to steady herself as she knelt on the ground, her hands pressed against the dirt for support. Her lips trembled, and she finally managed to speak in a hoarse voice. "Please," she whispered. "I need your help. The soldiers, they are coming. I can't run anymore." Jake's gut twisted at the sound of her words. Soldiers? Was she a prisoner? Or had she escaped from a battle? His mind flashed to the countless stories he had heard about Apache warriors and their fierce resistance to the Army's advance. He had heard stories of the raids, the bloodshed, and the savagery that both sides had inflicted on one another. Jake had always sided with the settlers, and yet here was a woman desperate and vulnerable in front of him. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he considered what to do. Part of him wanted to ride off, leave her behind, and avoid getting tangled up in whatever trouble she was involved in. But there was something in her voice, something that spoke of fear, not hatred. Jake had faced many dangerous situations in his life, but never had he encountered one so complicated. "Please," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. "I won't last much longer if you leave me here. I just need a little help." Jake hesitated. He had no way of knowing whether her story was true. The Apache were known for their cunning, and many settlers feared they would do anything to trick people into helping them before turning on them. But something in the woman's eyes told him she was telling the truth. Her body was too weak to be feigning such desperation. After a long moment, Jake made up his mind. He couldn't turn his back on her. The instinct to do what was right to help someone in need pushed him forward even though he knew there would be consequences. He had always followed the cowboy code of never leaving someone behind, no matter their background. "I'll help you," Jake said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him. He gently helped her to her feet, offering her a hand to steady herself. She winced in pain, but there was a grateful look in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to speak. Jake carefully lifted her onto his horse, adjusting her so that she could sit as comfortably as possible. He knew the journey would be difficult, especially in her condition, but he couldn't leave her to die out here in the desert. He had no idea how much time they had before the soldiers arrived, but he had to act quickly. He urged his horse forward, guiding it along the rocky path toward the creek, a place he knew was a few miles away where he could hide her until she recovered. The sound of the hooves thudding against the ground felt like thunder, and in his mind, he could almost hear the approaching soldiers, though he couldn't see them yet. As they rode through the desert, the silence between them felt heavy. Jake's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if the army found them. He had already risked his life by helping her, but if anyone saw them, there would be no way of explaining his actions. No one would believe that a cowboy like him would risk everything for an Apache woman. And yet, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility toward her. The way she had pleaded for help, the way she had trusted him, it all felt too real, too urgent for him to ignore. The sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the desert. The cool evening air was a relief after the scorching heat of the day, but it also made Jake more aware of the danger. Every rustling leaf or distant sound of movement made him jump. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see a group of soldiers chasing them. But so far there was no sign of pursuit. It took hours to reach the creek. By the time they arrived, Jake was exhausted, but he knew they had made it just in time. He led the horse to the water, allowing it to drink, and then he helped the woman off the horse. She staggered a bit, but she was still alive, still with him. "I'll take care of you," Jake said, more to reassure himself than her. "You'll be safe here for now. We'll figure out what to do next." The woman nodded weakly, her face showing a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. Her eyes were filled with a quiet strength, and Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how she had survived this far. As he built a small fire and gathered supplies to tend to her wounds, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn in a direction he never expected. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. He had just crossed a line and there was no turning back. The days after Jake had hidden Tala by the creek passed slowly, each one filled with tension and uncertainty. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and the nights were cold and full of restless dreams. Jake kept a watchful eye out for any signs of soldiers or danger, knowing it was only a matter of time before the army would come looking for her, but he couldn't bring himself to leave her alone. Despite everything that had happened between their people, Jake felt a deep responsibility to help her. It was as if fate had brought them together in that desert, and he couldn't turn his back on her now. Tala, though weak, was a survivor. She had been through so much in her life, much of it violent and brutal, but her spirit was unbroken. Over the days, Jake noticed how resilient she was, even in the face of the pain she endured. She barely spoke at first, only whispering words of gratitude when Jake would tend to her wounds or bring her food. But as the days passed, she began to open up, telling him stories about her people, the Apache, and the struggles they faced. "I am not like the warriors you may have heard of," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. "I am not strong like them. I am just a daughter of a chief trying to protect what is mine." Jake listened quietly, fascinated by her words. He had always heard about the fierce Apache warriors who fought against the settlers, but Tala's words showed him another side of the story. She spoke of the pain and fear that her people felt as they watched their land be taken from them. She spoke of the longing to preserve their way of life, not out of hatred but out of a deep love for their land and traditions. Tala explained that the Apache didn't want to fight, but they had no choice when their homes were destroyed, their families torn apart. For the first time, Jake felt as though he could see the Apache people through a different lens. He understood their struggles in a way he hadn't before. His views, which had once been shaped by fear and prejudice, began to change. But as much as Tala had begun to trust Jake, she knew the danger wasn't over. The soldiers would be looking for her, and no matter how much Jake had helped her, there was no way of knowing what would happen once they were discovered. The army had no mercy, and the consequences for hiding someone like her could be severe. The thought of Jake being caught in the middle of a war he had never intended to fight made her heart ache. She had never wanted anyone else to suffer because of her, and now she was afraid she might be the reason for Jake's downfall. One morning, as the sun began to rise, Tala's voice broke the silence. She spoke softly, but her words were full of urgency. "You have to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "The soldiers will be here soon. You must go before they find us." Jake froze, his mind racing. He had known this day would come, but hearing the words out loud made it all the more real. Tala was right. They couldn't stay hidden forever. As much as Jake didn't want to leave her, he knew that if he didn't, both of them would be in grave danger. The soldiers would stop at nothing to find her, and they wouldn't care who else they hurt along the way. Tala's eyes were full of pain, and Jake could see how much it cost her to ask him to leave. She had come to rely on him, just as he had begun to rely on her. But her sense of duty to her people outweighed everything else. She could not let Jake risk his life for her. "No," Jake replied firmly, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving you behind. We'll face this together." Tala's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected him to argue to try and protect himself, but Jake wasn't like the other settlers. He had shown her kindness when it wasn't deserved, and now he was showing her something even more powerful: loyalty. She shook her head slowly, knowing she couldn't change his mind. "You don't understand. If they find you, they won't show mercy. You will be punished." Jake didn't say anything at first. He understood the danger better than she knew. But his mind was made up. He couldn't abandon her. Not after everything they had been through together. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and he knew there was no turning back now. There was something deep within him that felt connected to her struggle. Something that made him want to fight for her, even though it meant risking everything. The air grew thick with tension as the sound of distant hoofbeats reached their ears. Tala stiffened, her body going rigid as she listened intently. The soldiers were getting closer. Jake stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't have much time to think. He had to act quickly. "Stay here," Jake ordered softly, his voice steady. "I'll take care of this." Tala wanted to protest, to stop him from doing something so reckless, but she knew it was no use. Jake wasn't going to leave her. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she was grateful for that. Jake grabbed his rifle and strapped his revolver to his belt. He moved swiftly, preparing for what might come. He could hear the soldiers now, their voices growing louder as they drew nearer. He took one last look at Tala, his heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. He couldn't tell her what he was about to do, but he hoped she would understand. The soldiers appeared over the horizon, riding hard and fast. They were dressed in dark blue uniforms, their faces grim as they scanned the landscape for any sign of their quarry. Jake's heart raced as they approached, his body tensing with anticipation. He knew that once they saw him, it would all be over. He stepped out into the open, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not hiding anyone," he called out, his voice loud and clear. "But I suggest you turn back now." The soldiers slowed their horses as they saw Jake standing there alone and unarmed. Their eyes narrowed, suspicious but curious. "What are you doing out here?" one of them asked, his voice harsh. Jake took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I'm just passing through," he said. "Nothing to see here." For a moment, there was silence. The soldiers exchanged glances, uncertain of what to do next. They had expected to find the Apache woman here, but Jake's presence was an unexpected obstacle. "You're sure there's no one else with you?" the soldier asked, his tone sharp. Jake nodded. "I'm alone. I've been alone for days." The soldiers didn't seem convinced, but they didn't press further. After what felt like an eternity, they gave him a cold, suspicious look before turning their horses and riding off into the distance. Jake exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The soldiers were gone for now, but the danger wasn't over. He knew they would be back, and they would be even more determined to find Tala. But for that moment, Jake had bought them some time. He returned to the creek where Tala was hiding, his heart still racing from the close encounter. "They're gone," he told her, his voice shaking slightly. "But we can't stay here. We have to keep moving." Tala's eyes softened, gratitude and relief flooding her expression. She knew Jake had risked everything to protect her, and in that moment she realized just how much he was willing to sacrifice for her. She wasn't sure how long they could keep running, but for the first time she felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this together.